Hello, my name is Rob Mason, podcaster and author of the best-selling UFO book series Encounters, and Booker Prize nominee for my novel Beam Me Up Taffy. Research plays a huge role in what I do. Detail is everything when writing novels. It's key for making a story as true to life and as believable as possible. When I set out to write my novel Beam Me Up Taffy, I started researching the UFO sightings of the 1970s and 80s in Pembrokeshire, in Wales, known as the Dyfed Triangle. This centred around the fascinating case of Broadhaven Primary School, where in 1977 a number of children allegedly saw a UFO on the school field. Here is the original news clip from the time of the sightings.
Well, I saw the spaceship. I didn't see the man. The spaceship, it looked a cigar shape with a dome on it. It had a yellowy, orange to red light on the top of it.
And how clearly did you see it?
Well, I couldn't see its face because it was too far away.
Oh, you say you saw a man as well, did you?
Yes.
And what about him?
Well, he was too far away to be seen as well.
My friend Philip here was trying to find a way over the stream, and I was looking at the bushes up the top of the trees. And then suddenly this silver cigar-shaped object seemed to pop up from behind the bushes and trying to take off. Then it disappeared again.
Are you sure it wasn't perhaps just a helicopter or an aircraft from the airfield near here?
A helicopter could land there, but that's private property over there. And if they landed there, they could be prosecuted. And with an aircraft, the only thing that could get in there was a Harrier.
Were you frightened at the time?
Yes.
Why?
Well, I thought there'd be a whole arm inside there or something.
Fast forward 40 years. During my research, I was lucky enough to be able to track down some of the children from Broadhaven School from 1977. Now in their 50s, it's clear that what happened to them has had a huge impact on their lives, as the following podcast will reveal. Interview number 1. Malcolm Rogers, aged 11 in 1977, now aged 51, working in Fishguard Port as a security guard.
Malcolm Rogers, security guard, Fishguard, originally from Broadhaven. Now you see a lot of strange things in my job. All sorts of dodgy stuff comes through customs and people we can always try it on, you know. The ferry route to Rosslare brings a lot of characters out of the woodwork, let's say. You know, stag do's, fancy dress, a lot. I seen a fox once as well. Travelled all the way from Wexford, on his own apparently. So the story goes. Crazy stuff. Mind you, I didn't ask to see his passport, mind. But you have to be pretty open-minded. There's a lot of local boys got jobs at the port too, like Tilky Morris, Gary Cracker, Tal Slack, Byron Weeks. Where else you got? Keith Griggs. You got Bobby Reese down at Customs. Got old Tony the Tiger, Tony Taxi. You got Ray Long, Pete Thin, obviously Slim Jim Davis as well. Doesn't miss a shift. Anyway, I was on a night shift once with Dave Hedge, or Hedgie. Well, his real name is Dave Hodge, but we call him Hedgie, because Hodge and Hedgie, Hodge and Hedge, sound a bit like each other, don't they? Me and Hedgie went to school together too, back in Broadhaven, back in the day. And we both seen the UFO back in the 1970s in the playground.
I can tell you about that.
So anyway, it was about 7 years ago now, and that memory is always stuck in us. It's stuck in our heads since the 1970s. Anyway, it's about 7 years ago now. Me and Hedgie, we were on the arrivals gate on a night shift, keeping an eye on the comings and goings of the foot passengers, you know, coming off the boat, off the ferry. And funny enough, I see the fox that night as well. Right. Anyway, Mike Griffiths, I remember clearly, Mike Griffiths had just popped out with a cup of coffee for us when we seen what we seen. And I'll never forget it. And we all seen it, you know, the same time. So it wasn't like I was, you know, on my own and saw it, innit?
Can you describe it?
Like from behind the truck stop, the cafe, in the arrivals car park, there was a huge beam of light and a big flashing starting. Hedgie shouts out, "Bloody hell, what's that?" Now, we know this guy called Peter Jenkins, one of the other security boys, had bought a new torch that week and had been flashing it around all week. Basically, he was new to the job, was Peter Jenkins, and he was trying to make friends, showing off his torch. You know, it's difficult when you start a new job. You want to try and make mates, innit? Anyway, he was a proper show-off, Peter, right? And he liked to make things up as well. He liked to make stories that were really sort of far-fetched and stuff. I don't know. I didn't like him very much personally. Anyway, it couldn't have been him who was making all this light anyway, because earlier that day, on his shift, he had fallen off a wall into the sea, and he had to be fished out.
Oh, God.
All the boys said he had hypothermia. There's a rumour as well going around the car park that a jellyfish had stung him on his ass. I don't know how much truth is in that, right? Anyway, this light got stronger, and it was proper strange it was, to be honest with you. We had to, as part of our job, go to investigate this, and I got a call through my receiver to go check it out. So me and Edgy made our way down behind the canteen across the car park towards where all this light was coming from. Just as we got within like 20 yards, bang! The lights all around us went out. So, you know, it was very weird. So, like, Hergie and me looked at each other and we both thought the same thing, you know? Cup of tea? When we came back out from having a cuppa, it was spooky. All of a sudden, Peter Jenkins shone his fancy big torch in our faces and said, "Alright." We both said, "Alright," back to him, confused. We thought he was in hospital. I mean, who recovers from hypothermia and a jellyfish bite on the arse and comes back on a night shift the same day? It didn't look right either, mate. I know he was dark, but his face looked all stretched somehow. Like his face was a mask of his face. Know what I mean?
Yeah.
And his hands were like longer somehow. Edgy said he looked like Edgy's brother, Slim Jim, whose name is Jim, and he's really slim. But that's not important. Anyway, I asked Peter why he was in hospital, and instead of talking, he did a kind of gargling noise, like.
Really?
And he kept on like licking his lip for a few seconds. Weird behaviour, like. Or we didn't know what the hell he just said, right? So he was just like staring at us blankly for a minute as well. Alright, I broke the silence after a while. I said to Hedgie, you know, let's go back to our usual spot if Pete's got this end covered, you know. But as we turned, Pete just vanished into thin air. Hedgie thought he probably went for a wee, like, in the toilet. But, to be honest with you, I don't think he had, because we were nowhere near the toilet.
Oh, right. Spooky.
So this was very suspicious. He looked like Pete, but he didn't. His skin was so stretched, his arms were long, and his lips were wet, and he was like doing this gargling noise, you know? Was this actually Pete? Or was it someone or something else? Like, I just can't get this thought out of my head, you know? There were bright lights. The bright lights were one thing, but he looked like his body had been taken over by like another entity.
Interesting.
Mind you, I'd only ever been on one night shift with Peter before that night and never really got a good look at him from across the car park, so to be fair, he might have looked like this weird anyway.
Yeah.
But that doesn't explain how he had such an amazing torch, does it?
No, I suppose not.
Because, you know, never in my lifetime had I seen such a bright light.
Mm-hmm.
It was otherworldly, almost like alien, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
1,000 candles doesn't cover it. 1,000,000 candles. Lumen or whatever. No way. I know what we saw that night.
Interesting.
Now, what's even stranger is this. When Pete disappeared to go, well, to the toilet or wherever he went, didn't he? He disappeared for good that night and was never seen doing shift work at the port again.
Right.
Or some say he had a drink and drug problem and an unhealthy obsession with torches. And he was fired the same week he started, but I'm convinced, or rather me and Hedgie are convinced that what we saw that night was the same as we saw when we were kids back in school. I reckon there's a huge connection.
Mm-hmm.
I've thought it for years. The UFOs never left us in Pembrokeshire.
Mm-hmm.
I reckon they're living amongst us, walking around the streets of Fishguard, disguised as winos and junkies. You know, dribbling with long hands.
Interview number 2. Colin Salmon. Aged 10 back in 1977. Now aged 50. Unemployed.
Back in the day, about 40 years ago when I was a nipper, we saw something quite special. And we weren't the only ones either in Broadhaven and Little Haven to see what we now call a UFO or a UFO.
Okay.
The bloke from the RAF came and investigated, asking questions about what people had seen and joked about it. And some local idiots even dressed up as in silver suits and wandered about the place, pranksters, taking the piss out of us and what we'd seen that day back in 1977 when we were kids. Bloody idiots. I mean, there's always a div in every class. Someone who lies about stuff. Like Carwyn Jones, who said he had a watch that ran on petrol. No chance. Solar power perhaps, but not petrol. The trouble is, a load of us saw the UFO on the school field that day. Carwyn was on holiday in Penscunner at the time with his nan's boyfriend or something, so he knew it wasn't one of his tall tales. What we saw on the fields in the school was like a sausage or cigar-shaped thing with bubble on top of for a window. Some of the boys said it was a lozenge shape, but I don't know what that is. I know what a sausage is though. At the same time, just so we're clear, I'm not under no illusion that there was a flying sausage around Broadhaven that day either. They don't make sausages that big, do they?
No, they don't.
That's just silly, man. What we saw was out of this world. It was a phenomenon.
Fascinating. Would you say this experience has affected you in any way?
Well, I've been massively affected by what I saw that day.
Go on.
You might laugh, but as a kid, you're very impressionable. And small things stick in your head. You can develop obsessions. Unhealthy habits. UFOs were in my thoughts constantly. And I'd see them everywhere. Or at least I thought I did. I was terrified of frisbees till I was about 15 or 16. When my mother sent me for counselling. She also sent me to a dietitian. Because the only thing I was eating was those cheapy Space Invader crisps and flying saucers. You know, those made of colourful polystyrene and filled with sherbet.
Yes.
By the time I was 25, All my teeth have fallen out. I was out of work, overweight and single. What did I have to offer to women, eh?
True.
Funnily enough though, things started to look up when I travelled to Folkestone on a National Express one year to the National UFO Convention. That's where I met Linda. Linda was heckish inspiring and larger than life. She was one of the speakers that day, and she shared wonderful UFO experiences with the room.
Yeah, great.
She made me feel fine about what I'd seen that day, and that being overweight, long-haired guy wearing a Pantera t-shirt was fine. She got me, I got her, and then we had each other. Literally.
Do you want to take a break?
She inspired me so much that day, and it's bloody weird how I started to see more and more UFO sightings from that day on.
Yeah, right.
It's amazing how you start to notice UFOs everywhere. Well, if you go looking for them, of course.
Yeah, there is that.
And if you want to see them, I suppose.
Yeah.
I'm in my 50s now, but I'm still seeing things. About 10 years ago, I decided to set up SPOOFOG, South Pembrokeshire UFO Group. Linda eventually left me and I needed to meet other women. Women mainly with an interest in UFOs in South Pembrokeshire. It's quite specialist, I suppose. SPOOFOG has developed more into like a dating group now for aimed at UFO enthusiasts, really. It's reasonably successful. We meet in the woodlands on the way to Knowlton on a Wednesday night for a chat about aliens and whatever anyone else wants to get up to. Some turn up in fancy dress and alien masks. Each to their own, eh?
Yeah.
Aliens can be quite sexy, right?
Well,
Lots of shenanigans goes on.
okay.
People are pretty open-minded in SPOOFOG,
Okay.
and they're generally up for anything.
Right, okay. Let's move on
Of
here.
course, our absolute passion, first and foremost, though, is UFO sightings in the South Pems area, and our priority is to document as many sightings as possible in the woods on a Wednesday night. A bit like the Garden Bird Survey run by the RSPB every year, except you don't document birds, you document about the UFOs you see. I mean, there's loads of birds up in those woods, mind. Let me tell you. And plenty of sausages flying around too. Well, after dark on a Wednesday night at least.
I get you. Interview number 3. Jim Fox, American UFO expert and broadcaster on the Undiscovered channel. Jim is a leading name in the study of UFOs and currently holds the record for least number of UFO sightings in Area 51 over a period of 6 years. Though now living in the US, Jim has a strong affiliation with his birth country, Wales.
Hi, my name is Jim Fox. These days I generally concentrate on UFO propaganda, experiences, evidence. These days I live in California, but I'm originally from Pembrokeshire, and I lived in Broadhaven until the early 80s, until my mom and dad moved to California because my dad had a new job in the adult film industry out there. Yeah, there's not much calling for that in West Wales, that's for sure.
Not really, no.
Man, what a phenomenon. I mean, just wow. The Broadhaven area is just literally crawling with aliens. Well, not literally, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Since the 1970s and through to the 80s, there was always, historically, strange happenings in that area of West Wales.
Like what?
Take the cottage burning incidents, for example.
What's
You heard of that?
No, tell me.
Let me fill you in. This is what it says on Wikipedia. Quote, maybe on Glendower was a Welsh nationalist movement violently opposed to the loss of Welsh culture and language. They were formed in response to the housing crisis precipitated by large numbers of houses being bought by wealthy English people for use as holiday homes, unquote. Wikipedia also adds, quote, they were responsible for setting fire to English-owned holiday homes in Wales from 1979 to the mid-1990s, unquote. I mean, come on. Really? So at the same time as you were getting all these UFO sightings in the Dovey Triangle, all these houses were being burned by maybe on Glendar, and nobody knew who was doing it.
Wow.
I mean, come on already. You do the math. With so many sightings of UFOs, isn't it goddamn obvious that these houses were lasered from the sky by one of the alien spacecraft?
Yeah, maybe.
I'm not the only one that thinks this. Did you ever listen to the overheard phone call recording from the early 80s?
No. What follows is a recording of a phone call between two UFO enthusiasts in 1981 during the height of the cottage burning incidents in Pembrokeshire.
Listen to this. I think it's obvious. All these UFO sightings and burnt down cottages, they're clearly linked. What way? I think these may be on Glendower, whatever, activists are aliens.
Well, these may be on Glendower people have never been identified, have they?
Well, exactly.
Interview number 4. Gary Winston, UFO skeptic and anti-UFO fanatic activist.
My name is Gary Winston, and I've dedicated most of my adult life to investigating all things so-called unexplained. I basically scrape beneath the surface, and generally it's the case that most of these unexplained situations are in fact very, well, how do you say, explained. I've travelled the length and breadth of the UK on ghost hunts and set up a YouTube channel called GaryGoesAGhosting.com to disprove the existence of ghosts. I've met farmers in Cardiganshire at 3 a.m. Who were bloody terrified in the middle of the night when they'd apparently seen what has become called the Beast of Mathry, whilst out seeing to their sheep in the middle of the night. In this case, it was just a big black bin liner, silage bag if you will, that blew in front of the tractor headlights. But probably the worst case I've ever been involved in was the Welsh Sasquatch, or the Bigfoot of Wales, known in areas of Carmarthenshire as the Sasquatch. Basically, we proved that this was a massive publicity stunt by S4C, by their nature broadcaster Yola Williams, who was running around in the Brecfa forest wearing a gorilla suit. His Twitter went mad. Well, it bloody worked in that case, I suppose. You must have heard about the mysterious creature that washed up in Broadhaven Beach. Yes, I must admit, I was a little surprised to hear that this was also happening, apparently, in the UK's UFO's hotspot, Broadhaven. Anyway, weird. Yes, it was 23 foot long with no face. As Wales Online called it, it was a mysterious-looking large blob. The UFO believers thought that it was a cow that had been lifted by an alien aircraft and dropped in the sea. They've got a theory that the aliens are vegetarians, and to be fair, crop circles are often found in vegetable fields. Anyway, they think the aliens picked the cow up, had a nibble, then kicked it out of the spaceship when they realised it wasn't a vegetable. My first instinct told me that it was probably a cow too, but it had fallen off a cliff during a coastal erosion incident, or slipped trying to jump from one headland to another, and had been stretched somehow in transit. Well, but I have to admit I've never seen a cow that long. It was 23 foot long. The Cretaceous Strandings Investigation Program got involved, and together with the Natural History Museum, they confirmed it was actually, in fact, a basking shark. So much for UFO involvement, eh? There's a load of rubbish floating around about the David Triangle days of the 70s and 80s. I mean, let's break this down. It sounds suspicious from the off. To start, why is it called the David Triangle when most of the sightings were in Cardiganshire and Pembrokeshire? I'm sure they could have thought of something a bit more relevant. Or, as some have suggested, there was an actual triangle scene, like a triangular-shaped craft of some sort. Now, this brings me to another theory of mine about triangles and UFOs. Bearing in mind there were loads of cars breaking down in the 70s, crap old bangers, etc, etc. Blokes would put these hazard triangle things you get from Halfords behind the cars. They were very popular, in fact, to the point that villages in the Preseli Hills had collectors' clubs for these bloody triangles. I know, really bloody sad, you might think. Anyway, now these weirdos would meet in lay-bys of a certain winter's evening and flash their headlights at each other's triangles, or triangle collections. Well, so they say. Maybe that's just another cover-up. There's another podcast there, eh? Ever heard of dogging? Imagine driving past and seeing this. Also, imagine all the reflective light. You'd get dazzled by the bloody triangles, especially on a rainy night. You'd look up after being dazzled, see nothing but triangles all over the place, including the sky. Hey presto, there you have it, a UFO. Now there was also the case of the burnt faces. One woman who owned a pub back in the 70s also claimed to have seen a spacecraft and would be regarded as humanoid faces peering from the vessel. She claimed that the craft gave off a heat, so much so it burned her face. Now, if you ask me, she's just spent too long on the sunbeds. It's obvious. She got heat stroke and started hallucinating. Add to that the fact that she lived in a pub, probably had a few lagers to cool her face down, causing further dehydration. Now, if you ask me, I think anyone would be seeing aliens, or at least claim that they had been seeing aliens the next day to explain the hangover and the red face. Not very plausible, if you ask me, eh?
Some fascinating insights and stories there. To conclude, this podcast set out to shed light on how the people of Pembrokeshire had been affected by the events of 1977. Did we uncover anything new? Maybe. Did we prove the existence of UFOs in Pembrokeshire? Maybe not. Or did we? One thing's for sure, since the UFO sightings in Pembrokeshire in 1977, the number of UFO fanatics has grown. Interesting characters with unusual fascinations, all obsessed with the same thing, the existence of aliens. So, are there other life forms on other planets? Some might argue that you needn't look further than Pembrokeshire to discover otherworldly beings. Until next time, thank you for listening. Goodbye.